Right, hello guys and welcome back. Ash and Iron is here and yep, it's definitely one of the updates of all time. However, regardless of the state of the game, I'm still doing my best to bring you the most up-to-date and concise information. So today we're covering everything that changed in the PvE sandbox in update 9.1.0, including Warlock ability tuning, exotic weapon and armor updates, and everything in between. And it's at times like these where your support really does go a long way, so please do leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed today's content. But without further ado, let's get into it, starting with some Warlock ability tuning. The Warlock Empowering Rift has now been changed to grant a steady flow of grenade, melee, and class ability energy over time while standing within it. And as you can see, it is pretty slow, so nothing substantial, but it's something, at least. And the amount you generate is also tied to your stats, so the higher they go, the more energy you generate. And quick side note, thanks to Engineer, we also know that the Ash and Iron update completely broke grenade and melee cooldowns, so if you're feeling that they're coming back slower, this is why. Though the fix is expected to land next week, starting September 16th. Also, kills while within your Empowering Rifts generate additional ammo generation progress for special and heavy weapons. It's 15% for specials and 10% for heavies. The Strand Warlock Weave Walk aspect has been changed in the following ways. The horizontal movement boost on enter and exit has been dramatically increased, as you can see from the side-by-side here, and the number of fragment slots it offers has been increased from 2 to 3. Furthermore, exiting Weave Walk now grants woven mail for you and nearby allies with a duration depending on how long you were inside the weave to begin with, and the maximum duration is a whopping 20 seconds, which is achieved after consuming 2 full melee charges. So basically, think of 1 melee charge as exactly 10 seconds of woven mail, and I just made a build on this if you're curious to play with it yourself. Sticking to the Strand Warlock kit, the Weaver's Call aspect has also received a buff. You now generate perched threadlings from dealing damage from any source or element. It doesn't have to be Strand, which is quite a nice change. And additionally, threadling damage now generates class ability energy, letting you loop your Weaver's Call ability much faster than before. The Stasis Warlock Frost Pulse aspect has received a buff. It now has a new passive perk which states that freezing enemies now generates class ability energy, so when using Frost Pulse within a group of enemies, you will now get a pretty good portion of it back. And if you then add Whisper of Refraction, defeating said frozen enemies is guaranteed to fully recharge your class ability. And I'm definitely going to be cooking up a build with this aspect and Vesper of Radius soon. I'm just going to wait until the Glacial Harvest changes roll around in October. And just to reiterate, this is any source of freeze that grants class ability energy, not just the one from Frost Pulse. Pocket Singularity, a rather underutilized melee ability, has received a couple buffs to give it some sort of relevance. So now the melee has 2 charges by default instead of 1, and the projectile lifetime has been increased from 1.1 to 2 seconds, making it a more mid-range melee ability. I still don't think this is enough to really push it into the spotlight, but it's definitely a step in the right direction. Next up, we have a single change for the Hunter ability sandbox, and that is that Gambler's Dodge has been retuned and slightly reverted to its old functionality, because now you no longer receive a 100% melee ability refund at 70 melee, but rather at 100 melee instead. However, to compensate for the need for increased investment, dodging near an enemy now doubles the amount of energy you receive. So basically, if you had 70 melee before, you can still get your full melee charge back when dodging, except now it's gone back to the old system of having to do so near an enemy rather than away from them, or you can just use 100 melee and nothing changes. A nice interaction I found with this is that for specifically Withering Blade, if you use both of your charges then dodge near an enemy with 100 melee stat, you'll now get both of them back, which wasn't previously possible. Lastly, for some general ability changes, Threadlings have had their PvE damage increased by 20%, which does indeed have a knock-on effect on the Warlock Needlestorm Super, so it has received a slight buff of around 7.7% with Thread of Evolution as a result. Then, Woven Mail has had a small change made to it where the application of it no longer resets the duration back to the original source duration. And the best example I can give for this is if you're using Weave Walk and Thread of Warding, collecting an Orb of Power will not refresh your timer all the way back to 20 seconds. In fact, it won't refresh it at all unless your timer is lower than 5 seconds. Finally, the melee and grenade stats no longer increase the damage of certain super attacks. Shield Crush still boosts the damage of Silk Strike though, so you can still pull some pretty decent numbers with it. Now we're on to some exotic armor changes, starting with Warlocks and Eunoia, where first, the max range projectile damage has been increased from a 15% to a 20% bonus, and the submunitions now track incredibly aggressively and are guaranteed to not miss. Furthermore, the scorch applied by the submunitions is now affected by Ember of Ashes, which allows Eunoia Helion to ignite in just 2 shots, which is pretty cool. And as a result of these these changes, a single Eunoia Helion is now able to deal a pretty hefty amount of total damage, with it being around 12k. And for context, a less than 100 Super Celestial Nighthawk does slightly more damage at around 14k. And yeah, the Helion is spread over a much longer time, though it is still respectable. Chromatic Fire has had its detonation radius with kinetic precision final blows increased by 36%, and the explosions no longer apply elemental verbs matching your equipped super. And non-precision kills also trigger explosions now, but all of this doesn't matter because Bungie have stated that this rework, I suppose you could call it, is being reverted in a future patch. Plus, nobody was using Chromatic Fire anyway. Moving on, Controverse Hold has unfortunately been nerfed. Now, charged grenades apply Weaken, which is a pretty cool addition, and Bungie could have just stopped there, but nope, the energy returns have been custom tuned for each specific grenade like Vortex, Axion, Supernova, and Scatter, all of which receive an overall lower energy refund. I don't have the specific data, but it has been confirmed that it is just lower across the board, which is a very weird change if you ask me, because everyone was using Verity's Brow anyway. Lastly, for the Warlocks, Boots of the Assembler have finally been fixed, where now the Noble Seekers correctly track to teammates that are within your rifts or wells, granting 5 seconds of Blessing of the Sky, which by the way is a 35% damage buff, making this the default exotic going forward for all Warlock well placers. Another quirky fact is that Blessing of the Sky also grants you plus 100 to your class stat, which is super strange but useful to know regardless. And the uptime is super easy to maintain, you don't even have to think about it as you'll have the buff for 99% of the well duration. Moving on to some Titan changes, Stronghold has received a whole wall of text rework, and I would go into more detail about it, but again, this is yet another change that Bungie are reverting at some point in the future. So pause if you want to read the changes, but just know that they will not be like this forever and eventually go back to their old functionality. No other Titan exotics have been tuned, so let's finish up with Hunter and Surturachne's Facade, which has received a rather minor change where weapon kills while Woven Mail is active now return health. And here I was expecting the health amount to be somewhat noticeable, but unfortunately the amount of healing granted only appears to be around 10 HP per kill, so better than nothing, I guess? I should note that this change is only for the helmet and not the Spirit of Surturachne version. However, speaking of, it too received a small change where the Woven Mail duration granted from using your grenade was reduced from 10 seconds to now 6 seconds, though for some reason it's still 10 seconds when using grapple. Regardless, this change is also being reverted in the future, so don't worry about it. Now we're moving on to some exotic weapon changes, starting with Mida Multitool. This weapon has received a complete rework and a brand new catalyst, so let's break it down. This weapon now has a new secondary trait called Mida Software Package that reads as follows. Final blows periodically apply modifications to this weapon, providing additional stats and benefits per modification. Chip gives faster handling and aim speed, Barrel gives bonus range and stability, Optics improves target acquisition, and Ammo makes shots detonate on impact. And as you can see in game, getting kills with Mida slowly increments this brand new meter, granting the various stat bonuses. And once full, it does indeed get explosive payload, and while weirdly it isn't listed on the perk description, once you're at least level 3, the weapon deals 15% more damage than at base. Furthermore, kills with Mida synergy weapons like from the Mida Mini or Mida Macro tool also fill the Mida Multitool meter. Dying with this weapon equipped will only regress your meter progress by 1 level instead of fully, which is quite nice. And the old No Distractions catalyst has also been removed in favor of a new one, which makes it so you gain enhanced radar resolution and increased reload speed when combatants are in close proximity, which I don't have sadly, so you'll have to take my word for it. But overall, this is definitely a very PvP oriented rework, as it's still pretty ass in PvE, I'm not gonna lie.
What the fuck is this piece of shit?
The Sturm exotic hand cannon has received a buff. Now, rapid kills with Together Forever weapons like Drang or the new Unfall load an extra overcharge round to Sturm's magazine, and the damage values for the overcharge rounds have been tuned per enemy archetype. The numbers are up on screen now for you to pause and take in, and there were a few more general changes made to the weapon. The maximum number of overcharge rounds has been reduced from 99 to 25, and it too has a new catalyst perk. Kills with overcharge rounds grant charges that provide a 50% ready and stow speed scalar for Sturm and Together Forever weapons, with a maximum of 6 stacks where 1 is consumed per ready/stow. Sturm has also had its ammo generation stat increased from 30 to 80, and the overcharge rounds are now buffed by the illegally modded holster buff from the Lucky Pants exotic boots, with some custom tuning where at 10 stacks of the buff, the damage buff is capped at 110% compared to the usual 450%. Graviton Spike has had some slight adjustments done to it, where now the time to gain overcharged shots has been reduced from 20 seconds to 7 seconds, and specifically with the temporal alignment catalyst, the time to gain the buff has also been reduced from infinite to now 7 seconds, which is 100% a PvP change and has no bearing in PvE, don't worry. Taraba has had its zoom increased from 15 to 16, and the maximum efficacy of the damage buff when using Peacekeepers has been reduced from 100% to 70% specifically for Taraba. Hawkmoon's paracausal shot is now buffed by illegally modded holster, but again at a lower efficacy of 50% at 10 stacks compared to the usual 450. New Lambion has had its maximum stack count of the Master increased from 100 to 999 because yeah, I guess. And as an unintended side effect, the Catalyst no longer procs at 20 stacks but instead 200 because clearly it was coded as 20% of the maximum stack count. Though I do believe this will be fixed soon. Lord of Wolves has supposedly had its hipfire damage versus bosses reduced by 20%, which for one hasn't actually happened, and two, Bungie said they're reverting this change in a future patch, even though it didn't even happen. Grand Overture has had its total reserves reduced from 58 to 48, though again this change is being reverted in a future patch. The Queenbreaker has had its damage versus bosses reduced by 8%, and the decreased charge rate via the combat sites was also reduced by 15%. Again though, this is another nerf which is being reverted in a future patch. Up next is a big one. Outbreak Perfected, Barrow Dyad, and Hierarchy of Needs have all had their super energy gains drastically nerfed, especially in the case of Outbreak where the gains are barely noticeable at all. However, unsure if this is intentional, but it still works perfectly fine for roaming supers as if nothing ever changed. Probably a bug if you ask me. However, these three weapons are not the be-all end-all when it comes to super generation though, since a simple setup with Mint Retrograde and Finality's Augur is able to generate a lot of super energy, but just requires a little more effort to set up. Furthermore, the new seasonal Rocket Pulse also generates a boatload of super with its remote detonations. Thunderlord has had an issue fixed where the Catalyst was refilling more ammo to the magazine than intended, where previously you could fire the entire reserves without reloading, but now you can only get through about half before having to manually reload. Whirling Ovation, which is the raid exotic from the Desert Perpetual, has been buffed where they have increased the rate at which the weapon's anticipation meter builds, and in my testing pre-patch it took 6 shots of Mint Retrograde to fully charge the meter. However, now it only takes 5, so it isn't a massive increase, and I still think this weapon could do with a bit more love, but it's a start at least. Up next we're tackling some weapon archetype changes, of which there aren't many, but here we go. Spread shot hand cannons have had their PvE damage increased by 8%, nothing out of this world, but if you're lucky like me and manage to snag yourself a Cascade Point Vorpal Aureus neutralizer from Trials, then this only acts to improve what is already the best Lucky Pants hand cannon in the game. Secondly, crossbows now have a heavy ammo marker on your radar, as well as a new silhouette in the weapon tray. And speaking of, I might as well mention that a new crossbow has been added to the game with Ash and Iron, and that is the Submersion, which is the first stasis crossbow. And yes, it does come with chill clip. For the last section, we're diving into the changes made to certain weapon perks, starting with Burning Ambition. And again, a whole list of changes were made to it, and you can pause if you'd like to, but the bottom line is that now the onset Scorch from Burning Ambition will appear sooner from dumping a given weapon's magazine, and in general, it should just feel like the effect happens faster than before, though from my personal testing, I still think it needs some more work. For this next bit, we have a bunch of changes made specifically to the enhanced benefits of certain perks to make them feel more enhanced. So doing these in a quickfire fashion, Enhanced Dragonfly has had its +5 reload speed removed, and instead it now adds +10% explosion damage. Enhanced Cluster Bombs has had its +5 blast radius removed and now adds +10% damage to each cluster. Reservoir Burst has had its +5 stability removed and now adds +10% enhanced shot damage. Magnificent Howl has had its +5 reload speed removed in favor of +5 enhanced shot damage. Eye of the Storm has had its +5 stability removed in favor of a 10% increase to all perk benefits. Flash Counter no longer grants +5 ammo gen and instead adds 1 second to the disorient time. Chain Reaction no longer grants +20 ammo gen and instead adds +10% explosion damage. Headstone no longer adds +5 stability and instead every kill always spawns a large stasis crystal. Chill Clip no longer gives +5 stability and instead makes it so the slowing detonations occur at lower magazine percentages. Pre-patch, my Tinashe's Mastery would proc Chill Clip on the first 7 shots, but now it procs with the first 8 shots instead. Pretty nice. Finally, Hatchling has lost its +5 handling, but instead there's a chance to generate 2 Threadlings instead of 1 with each activation of the perk. And can I just say that these changes, while small, are quite fantastic and are exactly what I expect enhanced perks to be when compared to their regular counterparts. A true enhancement of their base effects or a cool new feature that expands on the original. Finally, we have the dreaded nerf to Temporal Blast, which has been slashed across the board for all weapon types. However, it depends on the weapon type on how badly things have been hit. Thanks to Aegis's testing, we can see that heavy weapons have been hit the hardest, like the crossbow taking a 76% nerf, but then on the flip side, it isn't so bad for the rocket pulse with only a 36% nerf. So it's not the end of the world, and you can still very much run this perk and get a good bit of extra damage. So that about does it for today's news report. I hope you enjoyed and perhaps learned something new. And with regards to the overall state of the game, things are rough right now. I hinted at it at the end of my last video, but yeah, we're all feeling it and it sucks. I'll probably make my own video discussing my opinions on the matter, but either way, I do just want to say thank you to all of you who stick around and watch my videos regardless of the current climate. It's quite nice to see you all still leaving lovely comments and soldiering through. And for both our sakes, I hope Bungie get their act together, but I fear I might be sounding like a broken record by saying that. But anyway, once again, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now, dear viewer.